Hello, everybody. I'm Pasha Marlowe, and this is the Let Pleasure Be the Measure podcast. Today, I bring you immense pleasure with my guest, Lucia Pavone. Lucia is a pleasure instigator, love that, permission grantor, and rule breaker. And if that wasn't enough, she's also a somatic sex educator and an international speaker. I have been drooling over her website and her social media sites as to all of the content and beauty she is putting out into the world. So I'm so thrilled to have you today, Lucia. Welcome.
Hi, Pasha. Thank you so much for the loving invitation, the warm welcome. I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's exciting.
Me too. And I will admit in all transparency that while I do a pleasure podcast and host one, pleasure is a challenge for me. It's like my final frontier. It's something that I struggle with and I value. I am trying to create space for, but I lack it. And I also am in currently, just to give context for those that are listening who don't know me yet, I'm currently in a marriage with a man, but it's a sexless marriage. So I don't currently have, other than myself, a sexual practice. And so it's also been a lonely road in the last few years. And I just want to give that context because I want people to understand out there listening that you don't need to be a pleasure expert or good at pleasure or have a full sex and erotic life to hear these messages and to gain from them. So I'm just so thrilled for you to be here and to answer our questions and inspire us and maybe help us create space for it, for pleasure.
Thank you so much for just sharing that. It's very vulnerable. I know how it can be. And you're absolutely not alone, Pasha. I would say most of this planet has not been taught or told in their lifetime that their bodies are here for joy and pleasure and fun. Most of us have been shamed or guilted or religiously inflicted. And I'm not knocking religion, by the way. I'm just saying that there's experiences and parts of our lives, including like ancestral wisdom and trauma that has been brought in. So there's so many layers to this. Why most people, especially in the United States, which is, based in like colonized puritanical view of sexuality, amongst other things, there's so many intersectionalities around this topic that we could go on tangents, but because for the sake of this being about pleasure, we're going to talk probably a lot about sexuality, sensuality, and divine embodiment of energy. So they're not mutually exclusive. That's what I want to say. So whoever's listening out there, know that it's a gentle journey. It can be a very gentle journey, and it can be a very trying one to embody your birthright of pleasure.
Yes. And I love that you say birthright. In the beginning, you mentioned ancestral patterns and trauma. And I think that I had the limiting belief for the first 49 years of my life that because my ancestors and generations past didn't value pleasure, and because I grew up with a lot of trauma, that it just wasn't in the cards for me, that like, well, other people have it. I'm really excited for them, but I didn't grow up that way. And it's been in my family. So it'll probably just continue. And to break the pattern or to effort to create space to break the pattern has been a goal of mine, but it's hard. It's like swimming upstream.
Recognizing that that is part of your ancestral lineage is probably the first step. And I know that, and I'm going to be very blunt, that there's a lot of white women and white guilt around like, oh, my ancestors came to this country and, there's all these traumas that came with that and the infliction of trauma. And I don't know your ancestral lineage. I can probably just talk to myself, but I am first generation born in this country. My parents are from Sicily. So my ancestors were historically oppressed and taken over themselves. And so, knowing that, I can see where in my DNA, oftentimes the oppressed become oppressors, especially around sexuality. And, once Sicily became part of Italy, it took on the Catholic Church, the values of Catholicism, which was another layer of oppression. But prior to that, my people were complete melting pot of the Moors, the Phoenicians, Carthaginians. I mean, it was a melting pot, and that is my ancestral lineage. So, and in my DNA. So when I think of that, and I think of like being in this body in this country, I was not told about pleasure either, but there was something so innate in how I felt and embodied my own sexual life force, creative energy, that it was more than just work for me. For me, this path has been probably a multiple lifetime journey of being this energy, so I've come back in this body in this day and age. And when I actually listen to like my divine purpose, and I say this from a place of like, I know some of your listeners might be like, was she washy talking? There's a lot of people like,
woo woo, what's going on?
But let's put it into a couple different avenues. As a somatic sex educator, I believe the body, the soma, is not disconnected from the mind, heart, or sexual organs or our spirit. Like it's all connected. And from the perspective of, I have a good balance, it's like, I used to be a Spanish teacher. I'm highly educated. I speak multiple languages. I've traveled the country. I've lived in other countries. So my knowledge base and my education base is vast, but I definitely feel that when it comes to pleasure, truly breaking the cycles of ancestral patterning, epigenetics is real, where trauma gets stored, as well as the wisdom gets stored in our genetics. It's passed on. This is like scientifically proven. And I do believe that, we are embodied. These vessels are just like temporary. They're in the spirit. They're in the energy. Ultimately, we're all energy. We're not separate from the universe. We're not separate from the land. And everything that we think is just our thoughts. It's like, they're just thoughts. We create a reality, including the reality we create around pleasure and sexuality.
Yes, you said a lot just then. So I want to kind of hone in on the idea of somatic sexual healing and how you can take all of that and then embody it. Like, and I hear about it, and then I'm just like, well, how do we embody our emotions? And so I'm just wondering what your practice is, or what you guide people to do.
Sure. So let me rewind a little bit. I'll share a little bit of my story. So many years ago, back in 2000, I had my daughter was born. And during that time, I had a home birth planned and ended up after 4 days in the maternity center having a C-section. It wasn't an emergency C-section, but I remember and recall very deeply when I was cut open that it almost like cut open a wound of like all of the traumas, all of the sexual traumas, all of the pieces of my womb space not being okay, shame, guilt, all these pieces that came through. And it set off this part of me that just like suddenly I shut down. My sexuality shut down. My nervous system shut down. I had major trauma in my body and I didn't recognize what it was. And here I was like 2 lives. I was helping all these other women, working with, helping women birth after C-section, vaginally, and birth education. I was a birth photographer for many years. And I still at that time was suffering. I was suffering with pleasure with myself, but pleasure with my partner. So it was kind of going through the motions. And around 2003, I started like my path of discovering my pleasure. And so I started taking courses in sensuality, extended orgasm. I've had over 6,000 hours of hands-on stimulation of my clitoris, which produces the energy of orgasm in my body. So if you think of like Tantra, or you think of any kind of energetic sexual energy, but with the bonus of the actual stimulation of the clitoris, which has 8,000. This is, by the way,
Yeah. Yeah.
a big model of the clitoris. We see
Yes.
we
Which,
see
yes,
only about
holding
this
up a
much.
gigantic
And
clitoris, which,
purple
yes.
clitoris. So we see a fraction of the clitoris. And I'll just say the clitoris has as much erectile tissue as a penis does. So most of it's inside.
Oh.
That, yeah, most of it's inside of our body. So that alone took me on this wild ride. And fast forward, you know, close to 19 years later, here I am, that journey of embodying my sexual energy and learning how to be in my pleasure took me on a complete different path. It had me remember that this was the path I was supposed to be on, that I knew that the journey of supporting other people to understand that their bodies, their soma, the body, is not separate from their spirit. It's not separate from their heart, their feelings, how they interact. But we are, you know, our minds, people will go to therapy, cognitive therapy, and they'll try to work it out in our minds. But trauma is stored in the body, in the fascia, in the muscle. And so our autonomic nervous system, basically our subconscious energies, right, are will go to work on us before we actually can think of what's happening. And so it's called amygdala hijack. So our mind gets hijacked and our body automatically responds in a certain way, in some type of trauma response: fight, flight, appease, disassociate. You know, many of us have gone through this, and it starts to look sometimes in people like that's their normal way of being, that they, you know, that they're not sexual. Like that's part of, like you mentioned this earlier, Pasha, you were like, oh, it's just part of my lineage that people are not sexual. Is that true? Like,
No.
Is that true?
Okay, but I have to pause you for a second because because you're saying a lot, and it's all fascinating, and I think I'm stuck where many of the listeners will be, where they resonate with the past trauma, and specifically birth traumas as well, sexual traumas, and the whatever happened between the birth and the trauma and the feeling shut down in your sexuality and sensuality, and then 6,000 orgasms, and that's like 5,999 hours 5,999 more hours than I have on my clitoris. And so like how did you get from that very kind of shut down blocks place to the place where you allow yourself to have this pleasure and to receive it? That's where I'm stuck in this like post trauma place, and I think that's where a lot of my listeners are. And so it sounds great, and it sounds so far away, that I'm like, okay, what was step one? Like, how did you go from crying? How did you go from crying on the bathroom floor, bleeding from a C-section, and nursing and like lactating and crying to
for
that?
3.5 years, right? All of it's valid question, and it's I'm so glad that you rewound that, because it's so easy to be like, oh yeah, now, you're right. It was not an overnight thing.
I'm sure.
I mean, you're right. The bathroom floor crying, breast milk squirting everywhere, all of that, being a mom, being a wife, all of those pieces. How I got to the first step was somebody invited me to a night of communication games. So this started with communication, like learning how to communicate, like notice other people, notice what I felt. And that's how somatics works as well. Somatic sex education, I should say, because somatic therapy doesn't always focus on sexuality. It actually often bypasses our sexuality. So somatic therapists are different. I'm not a therapist.
Okay.
I'm actually a somatic sex educator, and I focus on sexuality. So there are special exercises for somatics. But rewinding to your question, in these courses, I first learned that a person with the clitoris can actually have orgasm for more than just a climax. So we look at climax as the orgasm. We've been taught that. They've been taught a lot of information that doesn't take into account that the clitoris is only purpose is to feel pleasure, and that orgasm is actually energy. It's not a climax. That you can actually feel orgasm not only in your clitoris, but because of your nervous system, you can feel it everywhere else.
Mhm.
That in itself was daunting. That idea that somebody, my partner, would be looking at my genitals, my pussy, putting their finger on my clitoris. I was married at the time, and I was married for 23 years. And recently, past couple of years, just finished up my divorce. But my husband and I went and did these courses together, and I was very resistant. And he was resistant, but then I was like, I'm just gonna go. You can come or not.
Yeah.
And he ended up coming, and
Good.
he's so grateful. I know that was part of his, and I'm going to say this bluntly, his training.
Mhm.
As a man, men don't get a lot of training either. They don't get they just think that they're supposed to be performative, stick it in. If they're heteronormative, heterosexual, cisgendered men, like put it in. And even women, cisgendered women, cisgender meaning born with the genitalia that is, normalized. Like I have a vulva and a clitoris. I identify as a woman. I actually am queer, so I don't identify as heterosexual.
Mhm.
But people out there who are used to P&V sex,
Yes.
penis and
Yeah,
vagina
penis and
sex,
vagina. Mhm.
we're taught mostly that sex is for their partner's pleasure. Women, we're often taught sex is, for them. You just got to do it because, they want it. Men are dogs, and that is so not true.
Yes.
So
Agreed.
not true. And so oftentimes because we disconnect from, we're so shamed around sexuality that we somehow compartmentalize sex and don't even think about how it connects to our connection to our spirituality, our hearts,
Yes.
solar plexus, our voices. Our
Yes.
voices can get shut down.
Yes.
So for me, it was a journey. I had a lot of resistance to the idea of surrendering my body to another person touching my clitoris besides myself. I was always very sexual, so I really enjoy self-pleasuring. But and you don't need a partner to learn how to have extended orgasm. By the way, this is not a prerequisite. It just takes getting over that initial conditioning that we have in societal, through society or our cultural conditioning or religious conditioning, or maybe even the aspects of what you've experienced in your life. So if you've had these experiences around your sexuality that ended up leading to your body automatically being shut down through a sexual trauma, or there's so many types of trauma that a lot of this trauma basically lives in our womb space. And men have womb spaces too. It's called hara. So men have womb spaces, women have womb spaces, energy gets stuck there. And because our culture is so scared around sexuality, it doesn't get resolved. Like we walk around as like these balls of unrequited trauma. But the thing is that we also have, for as much trauma and pain we have pleasure and wisdom.
Yes.
And our body has wisdom. The body is wise. The body never lies. It knows exactly what it's doing. And so, yes.
I want to go back to men in a second, because that's super important to me to include them in the conversation. But the part where you receive pleasure through solo sex or with a partner, if you're feeling depleted or traumatized and you feel numb to your clitoris, numb to emotion, numb to the world, do you come across people like that where it's like we almost I'll just speak for myself, I almost feel so much I numb out, like feel so much empathy for the world, and that I numb out, so that it's challenging for me to feel the pleasure. And so And so sometimes I get frustrated and then I stop
Yeah.
because it's just too disconnected, too hard, and it feels like a million miles away between my head and my clitoris, or even my
Yeah.
finger and my clitoris. And so I'm wondering how you bridge that gap for women who want to start that
Sure.
pleasure practice.
Sure. That's such a great question, Pasha. I appreciate that you're asking that. The starting of that really is noticing your body. Like
Mhm,
most of us don't actually put attention on what our body's telling us.
mhm,
This is where somatic sex education comes in.
mhm,
Relearning about your body really starts with understanding first, um, of creating like what you do want, like what
mhm,
I call it sensual mind mapping. It's called mind mapping, a way to kind of like write down what it is that your vision really is around your sexuality, and then you get to create the reality. Those steps can be have to be often are gentle. There is a mosquito flying around. I
and
wanted.
mosquito. And I love how you came to it through communication. And I'm thinking about the larynx and cervix connection here, but I came to it through singing. And
Yeah.
like I didn't even know I had a sensual side to me until I started singing. It's like,
Right.
what? But that connection is still there. So I think it's interesting how people can come to their uh sex and sexuality and sensuality and
Yeah.
pleasure in a way that's unexpected. It could come through their art, their drawing, their gardening, right?
It's so true. So I see a spectrum of people. So I either see people who are very hyper aroused, or I see people who are very spiritual. Generally, I work with spiritual people. So they're stuck here in the ethers of the divine, their divine essence, and or they're stuck here at the throat where they can't voice their opinions, or maybe they sing because they don't recognize, um they do recognize that they have this ability, right, of creative energy, because our sexual energy is our creative energy. And instead of actually confronting their sensuality and feeling throughout their body and understanding their sexuality, they will cut that off because it's like, well, it's not that important to be able to survive in life, right?
Right.
But imagine if you actually acknowledged that much life force energy,
Mhm, mhm.
and you started to actually use it to love, as a pathway to loving yourself deeper. Because
Yes,
then you're going to just be out there reflecting love.
yes.
You're going to be, if people actually had more pleasure, and I'm not talking like penis and vagina necessarily, although that helps for some people, but really started to enjoy pleasure in all parts of their lives, we'd be having a very different story right now about our health issues, about how people are treating each other in this pandemic, um, even how people are showing up as parents.
Mhm.
It's like our sexuality is not separate from the rest of our lives. This country in particular, and certain countries, shame people. I mean, look at and I mean, if you are somebody who believes that people shouldn't have abortions, fine. But women's sexual health being dictated in this
Yes,
country by other people
yes,
is just another sign of sharing that, like, we are so oppressed as
yes.
people. Women are so oppressed that white men get to make those laws for them. And
Mhm,
there should never be a law governing, mandating anything that
mhm.
goes and happens to your body. You do have that autonomy to feel. And sexuality, being cut off from our sexuality, is one way that
Yes,
people are kept down. They're oppressed. It's a form of oppression. So quite
yes.
quite honestly, pleasure activism is a thing. You
Oh,
know,
yeah, and you brought up men again, and
yeah,
I think I have a lot of anger and rage,
right,
white men making rules about abortion, white male doctors telling me I can't have a VBAC,
right, right,
vaginal
right.
birth after a C-section, or I should get a my tubes tied, or there was sexual abuse from white men. So I have a lot of white men trauma, and so it's hard for me to connect intimately with
Mhm,
men in
mhm.
general. And I want to very much include them in the conversation. I'm currently married to a man. I want to include my own husband into the conversation.
Sure,
And
absolutely.
somehow it's almost like a separate world, though. It's a separate entity. I'm raising two sons. One is an adult, so I'm more raising one at this point. And it's very important for me that he's, gentle and strong and emotionally intelligent, and in touch with his own pleasure. And I find it so fascinating that I keep getting stuck in the trauma of what white men continue even today to do to women in this country. So that rage gets in the way of my intimacy and pleasure with men. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I want to say is that I do not hate men at all. I actually, people, cisgendered men, I love them. I'm like, I love them so much. I wrote a course for them called Rise of the Divine Masculine, because I really do feel like there's been a lot of misinformation and pressure put on them too, and how they have been taught around what women want, how to interact with them, that somehow we're lazy and crazy. There's so many different facets here. I think we have to understand that there are deep woundings on both sides.
Both sides.
It's not just women who've had sexual trauma. It's not just women who have gone through abusive relationships. It's not just women who have been shut down sexually. Erectile dysfunction is an epidemic now for many reasons, and I think one of them is there's a mental block that men think that they have to perform a certain way, or have to be a certain size, or there's something wrong with them because they're not being able to give to their partners. But ultimately, I think there's this cutoff from their own divine feminine side, and vice versa. We're not balanced within our own energies, right? So we tend to, I know when I was younger, I was a tomboy. I was like soccer playing, kicking the boys in the shins. I did not want to hang out with the girls. But at the same time, there was like a softness and like a motherly, nurturing part of me too.
Yes.
So I had those pieces, but my divine masculine side really looked like the lower vibration. So like when we talk about this idea of what divine energy is, it's really an innate part of who we are. There's nothing like, it's not just a spiritual understanding. It truly is an embodied energy within us that, for the sake of defining what that looks like, I think in our culture, we have an idea of what man and woman is, but this isn't about being a man or a woman. This is about the energies, the properties of what that looks like in a very basic level. So some of the lower vibrations of like what shows up in the divine masculine energy. So it's a lower vibration. It's not quite divine. It's kind of like, and it's not just in men, but there's a feeling of like controlling and distancing. There's goal orientation rather than process. There's like a testosterone overdrive. Work is never done. Go, go, go. Selfish, controller, forced, guarded. What is it? Competitive. There's that kind of energy is like this low vibration, and like just trudge through. It doesn't matter what kind of gender you identify with. When you have this, your body is stressed out. Same thing with that, the feminine energy. Some of the lower vibrations of that feminine energy are like overindulging and screw it and despair, victimization, self-doubt, unsure of ourselves. And so those show up like we martyr ourselves as well. Those are just a couple of those things. So, as we start to kind of, by the way, it's 1:11 here. If anybody's woo woo with me out there.
1:11 on Pacific time right now. Cool.
There's a higher, the next level of vibrating for like divine masculine is like being a visionary, logical, organized, willpower, more structure, focusedness, consciousness, being the protector, planning, activating, doing. So there's like this, those are some of the energies in that higher
Yes.
divine masculine. Higher energies of the divine feminine include like flow and mystery, creativity, being gentle, sensuality, body-based truth, responsive, nurturing, gentle, inspiring, releasing, surrender. And so when we get to when the energies start to come in balance, what that does to how we feel in the body, how it shows up is as like nirvana, as oneness. And let me
Yes.
tell you, it's the party is right below nirvana. I mean, oneness is great, but the party it's pretty lonely sometimes.
I have never felt nirvana, and I wonder how, when we're working in partnership with somebody,
Yeah.
if you're working at a different vibration at that moment in your life, as
Yeah.
we change and ebb and flow, um that conflict is there, right? The other one's trying to like pull the other
Sure.
one up,
Uh-huh.
or drag the other one down, or whatever it may be. And do you find that dance is just hard to navigate uh when people are in partnership with somebody who's on a completely different vibrational level?
Yeah, yeah, it can be very difficult to navigate because oftentimes we are still living and coming from a place of, trauma response. So
Mm-hmm.
then we add more and more trauma onto that in our relationship. Our partners know how to trigger us, just their energy, because they take on our energy, especially if
Mm-hmm.
we're having any kind of sexual energy with them. That's transferred through sexuality. So
Mm-hmm.
to get to that oneness, which is awareness, respect, balance, open-heartedness, nature, freedom, synergy, potency, life force, clarity, in the moment, present, authenticity, vulnerability. That's energy, the humble
Mm-hmm.
confidence that we share. That comes from knowing thyself
Mm-hmm.
first,
Yes.
being willing to separately from a partner. This is the thing that we think that just because we're in partnership that we are owe somebody something or have to be
Mm-hmm.
obliged to be the other person's half, but no, whole 100%, 100%.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we have our own um thoughts and feelings, and when we feel like we are trapped because we're told like that's trapping, we don't allow our partners to do things, and it's like it's not up to us whether or not our partners get to do things. Like they have their life, like
Yes.
they have their own life. So it can be hard to get over that hump because we're used to responding a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when people who identify as women are not in touch with their full potency of their sexual energy, that they don't utilize it because this is one of the ways we feel off balanced and out of body, right? Instead of feeling
Yes.
embodied, we feel victimized and we feel out of touch, and then we want to put it on our partners,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like as if it's their responsibility to take care of that,
Right.
but it's really not. And so it really takes relearning. It takes
Yes.
unlearning first. And I
Y-
when I work with women, I have a 4-month intensive called Heal Your Sexual Soul. And I also there's my basic course which is aligned to your sensual life. That basic course is, when you ask me what do women what can women where can women start, that kind of basic course that I offer, that has all the components. So decolonizing your sexuality, returning to our natural state, which is fun, and knowing
Mhm,
that fun and
mhm.
pleasures are birthright, understanding how to communicate what it is that we desire, what our vision is in practical terms, but also in a way that we create our own safety, relearning sexuality versus sensuality, and then being a sensual explorer and actually doing the embodied pleasure practices. If we can't go straight to the clitoris, our skin is literally a sex organ. It's an extension of our sexuality or our sexual energy. Our fingertips, our brain, all
Yep.
all
Mhm,
orgasm starts in our brain. So 90%
mhm.
of orgasm is is based conceptually based. So even if you don't have the use of your limbs, you can think about
Yes.
anything and it will translate to your body. So how do you make a choice? Choice is easier said than done, because if you're getting hijacked from all your trauma, that's really hard to make choices. But if you are going in with the intention and have your attention on your body as the number one priority, you can start with the basic body scan. I think almost everybody can take 10 minutes a day and without judgment, without creating a narrative, just scan their body from the soles of their feet to the energy field up, all the way up, and even around their body, so that they understand like the body exists. When you
Yes.
put attention on it,
Yes.
have any attention, you start to feel.
I like that idea. And I'm somebody who might not create space and time for that during the day. And then I'll get to the end of the day. I'll be, I forgot to create space for that again. So I've been taking to doing this body scanning in the morning when I first wake up, like just
Right.
before I start moving out of bed, or just when I first come into bed. But I love that idea of going from the soles of your feet up to the crown of your head and breathing into all these parts of our body and being grateful for all of our body, and starting to realize how are we feeling, and checking in on our own. And I also appreciate that you're saying that it's a journey that we to ourselves first, and that we need to feel whole and just in our knowing and understanding and tapped into our own intuition and sensuality and sexuality before we suggest that another partner can connect with us wholly. And so if one person is doing a lot of this work, it's you're creating time for it, you're doing the somatic healing, and you're learning and unlearning. And sometimes, again, this high-low vibration, another partner might not be at the same place of learning and unlearning. And then we feel like we outgrow our relationships. And I don't know if that's how it's translated for you as you left, as your marriage was complete. I'm in my second marriage, but I find this to be true with a lot of the clients I have, that women are feeling like they really want to include their husbands on this journey, this pleasure journey. And they're fiery about, they're passionate, especially the midlife women, like 50 and up. We're like, we have not accessed pleasure and fun yet, and we are ready, and we're going to do this, and we're going to finally tap into our sexuality. And are you on board? Because we're going to a retreat and a conference, and we're gonna try these, these courses. And then like, what? And so I wonder how we can gently start to incorporate men into the conversation. I love that you do men's groups. And how does that look for the men who might be very new to this work?
Right. Oh, that's such a great question. So a lot of men that come to me, they usually come for like a few things. They have erectile dysfunction. They're not confident. They feel like they can't please their partners, so they want to try to please their partners, or they're at that place where they're more advanced and they're wanting to learn semen retention and get into those higher levels. So there's like 4 levels, right? From the very basic.
I've never even heard of semen retention. So
right. So I know. So I work on multiple levels. Like there's courses, and then there's actual in-person sacred Tao pelvic healing work, tantric work. As I call myself, a sacred intimate, where I work with hands-on. So if there's trauma blocked, and I've had established a relationship, I actually work hands-on, meaning touching the genitals in a way that releases scar tissue, tension, unblocks places energetically. So I work on multiple levels. So how to get the men involved is they don't work the way we do. They're like one track mind. They're like, you literally have to just start doing it yourself and embody it. Communication's the key, but they will give you all these reasons why they shouldn't. Like, oh, well, now you want to have sex after all these years of not having sex. Oh, wait, you want to do what? Like, people don't need to know our business. Like, there's all these things that will resist. And so I think the best way to go about it is to say, you know, I have more time and realization that like this is an important aspect, and you're also, you know, getting older as well. It's like we're going to have to learn how to relate and communicate on different levels as we get older, because maybe we're not going to be fucking for like 5 hours straight when we were 20, or you know, we're not going to be like, you know, just getting a quickie in the bathroom. Like we want to take it to the next level. Like what can we do to appreciate and enjoy the bodies that we're in now as we age? And this is a thing that I'm learning, that women somehow get dry and you know, disassociated. That's not really how it works. Like when after 40, you know, we're not shriveled up. It's like that's actually when we're having our like mega sexual embodiment, where there's so much energy. If you think puberty was like intense, it's like, you know,
Yes.
We light up, and it really is a use it or lose it. Like you must use it. And
how much?
A lot. As much
No,
as you
how
want.
often until we lose it?
You don't have to ever lose it. That's the thing. It's
No,
like,
how often do we have to use it before we lose it? Are you talking like once a month, once a week? To
daily.
what
I
extent?
would say I've had a daily pleasure practice since I was in my early, well, I would say consistently since my early 30s, 31, 32. I just turned 49. I, you know, the gynecologist has been like, oh, your tissue's good. You know, it's like
yes.
You're good. He's like,
yes.
she's like, you're good. Like you got all the goods still. It's like, yeah, we sure do, but that's because our clitoris is a muscle. So think about like doing push-ups.
Yes.
Like if you don't do push-ups, your body kind of
atrophied.
Yes. And so your clitoris will atrophy, a penis will atrophy. They're all muscles. So
can you get it back once atrophy happens?
Absolutely. Because a lot of it is mental, you know, unless there's very, very few physical reasons why you don't feel sensation in your clitoris. And there are some. So, but there, even those can be shifted. And we, you know, I just searched men's sexual wellness the other day, and all I saw was advertisements for like erectile dysfunction and pills. Now we are over I'm not knocking the medical system, but we're like one of the worst countries for our medical well-being, including our sexual health. And we're like a industrialized, you know, first world country, and we are very low on the healthy scale, which is very sad. Because
it's an interesting correlation,
right,
though.
Right. So what's going on here? There's a lot of big business and a lot of money in pharmaceuticals. And so, as we know, there's a lot of pushing of drugs, a lot. And it's to the point where, you know, the side effects of drugs are worse than the actual thing that you have. Like it's like, wait a second, it's like, oh, I might lose my liver just so I can, you know, do this. So or look at the side effects of erectile dysfunction drugs. I mean, they are not pretty. Just to get your dick hard, come on. No. A lot of it is, and I would say, and I have worked firsthand with people,
literal with your hands,
with my hands, for men who can't have erections. It's suddenly that you know, I'm milking their prostate, or I'm working with the energy in the fascia, in the tissue. Suddenly they're having erections. And
okay, wait, do you do this alone with the man, or are they with a partner at the time?
It depends on they're generally alone. Like even if they're with the partner, there's a lot of communication before we get there. And I'm also clothed. So just to put it into reality, that they are like on a table, and we're working through, you know, we've worked together for quite some time and done a lot of the somatic work together, and then they get to do the healing work. And so I mean, like, I'm a rule breaker. Like I said,
know, but there's a lot of trust and rapport that has to be built before
trust,
that
rapport.
happens.
It's fringe. It's fringe. It's fringe.
You're so fringy.
Work.
Yeah.
Well, I don't even call it work. It's like modern day, being a modern day temple priestess, you know, of the ancient orders of the
Yes.
oracles and
You're in
sibyls.
California, right?
I am. So
I wonder how long it's going to take for a priestess like you to make her way to Maine. It's a
not too
different.
long. Usually that mimics on the East Coast. And you know, the other piece I do, and I've just recently started speaking about this because it is legal in California and a couple other states, but I also use psilocybin as a source to microdosing. If you don't know what psilocybin is,
I don't have any
magic
idea.
mushrooms.
Oh, okay.
So psilocybin as a
Got it.
medicinal fungi in
Mhm.
conjunction with trauma healing. So
Mm.
on a very, very, very low frequency dosage, so that there's an opening and a relaxation. So this, I believe, should be is like it's supported so many people that um it's just wait. You're gonna start seeing a
We're like
lot more.
10 years behind
You're gonna
California.
be seeing a lot more information about people who are utilizing this within their
Yes.
scope of, and I don't call it work, I just call it divine calling. And
Mhm.
I want to say the concept of work, I'm doing my work, that is so goal oriented. So I was like, if you can take the word work out of it and just, I
Mhm.
call it, being on a journey of sexual emancipation.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so when you actually take those layers off and you can emancipate
Mhm.
your body, your heart, your
Mhm.
mind, and your spirit, then you can move into the next level of knowing around the importance of truly doing your own healing work around your divine masculine and your
You
divine
said work.
energies. Doing your healing work, right? So for the lay people out there, doing your healing work.
Doing the work. Yes.
And so when I refer to it, like I said, I'll say, journey of sexual emancipation. But
Yes.
for people out there, we still want to think of it as work because it's the way we talk about it. Hey, do your work around yourself.
Yeah.
You
But
can't be,
that's
yeah,
so true, because if I say, oh, I have to practice my pleasure today and do the
right. It
work,
doesn't
that
sound
is
fun, does it? Like it's your birthright. So this is
my
like
birthright. Yes.
relearning. It's like
Yes.
I'm coming back. I like to say healing is remembering your body's wisdom.
Yes. I do definitely appreciate that philosophy. My inspiration was Mama Dina, Pussy a Reclamation. Did you read
Sure.
the book?
Sure.
And there's a lot of somatic sexual healing in that too, a lot of movement and dance. But I do really think that it should be a pleasure and something that you look forward to, and something that lights you up, and something that fuels you and energizes you, not something you're
Right.
checking. Okay, I did it. I'm good. I meditated. Check. I orgasm. Check. I did my celery juice. Check. I'm good. I'm good. Right.
Right.
So having it be part of your day because you want to reclaim and want to
Start
expand
off with that.
because you're
You always
curious.
start with that. And so yeah, Regina, we're from like the same school of
Mhm.
I think just a couple years apart in like when we started that journey.
Yeah.
And so her philosophies, they're so beautiful, and she's made it into like something plausible for the masses.
Yes.
And in truth, one size does not fit all.
That's true.
Um, and you have to look at culture, and you have to look at
Mhm.
religion, you have to look at societal conditioning.
Yes.
That yeah, I'm one of those people who demonstrates an hour-long orgasms. So I totally get that place of like, oh, it is completely possible, but that can be really daunting to start with. So
Mhm.
starting with, little things like cooking, like we were talking about, like when you're
Yes.
eating out, when you're
Yes.
walking and you're taking a beautiful walk and by the beach or in the redwoods, painting, doing the things that you really love, creating our businesses. A lot of people who identify as women will put all their energy into their business and go, 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 go. That at the end of the day, they have nothing left for themselves. And it's like, at least not for their sexual pleasure. And
Yeah.
so this is a fine line to think about. Like everybody's like, well, you can find pleasure in everything. You can, and you can go to the gym and exercise and walk and do all these things, but most people don't even confront their sexuality, their
Yes.
sensuality, their whole bodies. And so this is the part, this is the reframe, being we're sensing beings. Our sensuality is like an innate part of who we are, and it's
Yes.
separate than our sexuality, but it can enhance everything we do in the bedroom.
Yes.
So it really is a sensual journey. So lighting up through our senses, whatever senses we have. Some of us don't have touch, taste, smell,
Yes.
sight,
Yes.
sound. That
Whatever we have.
whatever senses that you do have, including conceptual thought, go ahead and take that dive and exploration, because truly, we're here to be love. I know we're getting towards the end of this.
You're
If I
wrapping it up beautifully.
yeah, if I can, impart anything, any wisdom of wherever you are, whoever you are, however you identify, is that, you know, being in that place of um, oneness with yourself is a gift
Yes.
for humanity. To love yourself without condition and know yourself, know thy sex, know thy heart, know thy throat, know thy, mind and spirit. Aligning in that way really allows you to, rise in sensual excellence, whether you identify as a man or a woman. And
Yes.
then you can impart love. Then you can see people. Then you can see and come out with two people and reflect love.
Yes. Yes. That was beautifully wrapped up, Lucia. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I feel so blessed. I feel very
This
blessed.
was packed with loads of wisdom and inspiration. It'll probably be an episode I listen to and be like, why didn't you stop and ask about that? Go back. Yes, and it oozes out of you the pleasure and the knowing, and the wisdom from generations past. So I so appreciate you sharing it all with us
Yeah, my
today.
pleasure, Pasha, truly. And if there's a part two, let me know. If
Yes,
there's
yeah, there might need
questions,
to be
if
like,
there's
go back, go
questions,
back.
part two is fine.
Remedial pleasure. So how can people best reach you if they want to follow
Sure.
you, take your courses, all the things?
Sure. Well, I'll send you, I think I sent you a link of
Mhm.
resources, but you can go to my website, luciapavone.net. You
Okay.
can find me on IG, Instagram, or Facebook under Luscious Lucia Pavone.
Mhm.
And there's links to set up a discovery call with me. So
Beautiful.
it's a complimentary call, and you can, 30-minute call. There's an intake. So um, I get your full thorough history before we even talk. And that's probably the best way. When you go to my website, you can also see there's so much information. I have a resource section below with other podcasts, other, pieces that you can look at. Go to my IG. There's a lot of information there. But yeah, I'm accessible. I'm accessible.
Yes.
Don't go calling me and being like, I have erectile dysfunction. Fill out the form, okay?
Fill out the form first.
Okay.
She's a
That's it.
rule breaker, but follow her
Yeah,
rules,
follow the
everybody.
rules. And if you do break the rules, be prepared to pay the price.
I don't want to follow anybody's rules, but everybody better follow mine.
Ah, see,
That sounds like
exactly.
me.
Ooh, talk about calling out. All right. I love it.
Oh my goodness. Such a pleasure talking to you. I know everyone out there, you're going to have lots of questions and comments, and I want to hear them all. And so you can message me, you can email me. My email is pasha@pashamarlow.com. Couldn't be easier. You can obviously find me on Facebook and Instagram. It's under my name, Pasha Marlow. And you can also do a free discovery call with me as well. There's a Calendly link in the show notes. And I would love to hear from you, hear your stories, and let me know what you want to hear about and talk about in future episodes. I appreciate everybody listening. I hope you take a moment to subscribe and review and share and all the things, because it helps fuel me. It gets me all lit up inside. And then it helps me find guests like Lucia who light us up and encourage us to get back to our birthright, our pleasure. So everyone have fun with yourself today. Okay.
Yay, love that.
Thank you all. Bye.